rising climate, you know, the road is, they don't last as long anymore. And this has created significant challenges that I'll talk about a little bit later. But Pugatawagan is located on the 56th parallel on the border of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And in my language, Pugatawagan means the literal act of putting out the net. So it's a fishing community. And all my family, we're all fishermen. We do it kind of commercially now. It's a livelihood for a lot of my relatives. My late father was a commercial fisherman. We're also hunters. We live off the moose, as well as, you know, water mammals like beaver and muskrat. And we eat a lot of birds like spruce grouse, gooses, hey, goose, and ducks of all varieties. We live on a lot of really wonderful, yummy country foods like that. And you know, in my community, it's a pretty staunch Roman Catholic community, like a lot of northern communities. The presence of the Christian faith is still very prevalent. But don't be fooled by that. You know, even though in my community, and my own late great-grandparents, who I was gifted to spend a good deal of my childhood with, even though my great-grandmother would walk around the bush with her rosemary, that old lady knew every single medicine in the bush that there was. Okay, so no matter what, there would be people, and I remember this from my childhood, be running around. There's a big meadow outside of our cabin, the lake down the hill, and run around in the meadow, and there'd be berries, unlimited berries, raspberries, blueberries, cranberries, strawberries, rose hips, all kinds of yummy stuff, eh? And we'd eat these things when we were children to the point of getting sick. And then we'd do it all over again after we took a nap. And, you know, I remember as a child, every day, there would always be a different crew that would just come out of the forest, you know, and there'd be some big, huge Cree guy carrying I gotta watch my language here. See, that's a good thing. On my last talk, somebody posted on the talk, somebody posted my talk, and it said, really great presentation, except for the swearing. So this is good. But I would always remember being a little kid, and I'd be like, you know, smaller than this guy here, and I'd be like, holy cow. And there'd be some big, massive Cree man come out of the bush with a big moose leg on his shoulder, or somebody'd come out with back when I was a kid, the pike. We have these fish called northern pike. They're like wolves, in the water. No, really, they are. I remember sitting on my dock at our trap line, and I'd look out on the water, and there'd be ducks swimming by, and duck gone, duck gone, you know? And those are the pikes, okay, the water wolves. And they got great big fangs on them. White folks call them snot rockets because they're really slippery. Anyway, but these fish would get to be 6 feet long when I was a little guy. You know, so you'd get these guys coming out of the bush with these big fish, and they would go see my grandparents. They would bring, you know, these gifts to my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather in exchange for medicine. And my great-grandparents were herbalists. You know, they understood just about every medicine in our territory. And it was interesting because, you know, my grandmother would be the one that would prepare medicine, but my great-grandfather, well, he would go check our rabbit snares, would be the one who would harvest it. So they had a little operation going, eh? And we always had meat. We always had fish. We had our own net out, but for the most part, people would come and they would bring things. And it was pretty incredible, too, because we could freeze our meat even in the summer. Because what my great-grandfather built was a hole in the ground where we lived, and we're so far up north, although that's no longer the reality, the permafrost is gone. But when I was a kid, you could dig down about 6 feet and you would hit permafrost, permanently frozen ground. And so you dig into there and you put a culvert in there and put a lid over it and lock it up, and your food would be frozen all year long. Eh? Pretty neat. And so the reason I share this with you, though, is because even though my community is like hardcore Roman Catholic, like so many indigenous communities, the traditional ecological knowledge base continued. And they just found ways to be able to maintain certain practices, as part of our resiliency to colonization, to oppression, to dispossession. And going back to my grandfather, I remember walking with my grandfather on a trap line. And he would get real choked at us as boys. He'd be like, hey, come over. Because anytime we'd go off his little trail, he had a trail. And he'd walk that trail every single day to go get his snares, And he would always complain. He'd be like, boy. And I used to get sick of hearing him say it because he would just always say it. He would complain about other trappers. And he'd be like, boy, I hate lazy trappers. Trappers that don't go check their traps. They let their... Because if the trapper doesn't check their traps, their food rots, And then they can't use it. They can't eat it. And so you always be drilling that in our heads. You'd be like, oh, every day you got to get up and go and do this stuff, right? And if we were running around in the mushkeg, he'd be like, hey, you gotta get over here. Just walk on the trail. And the reason for that, I said, well, what the heck do we gotta walk on the trail for, Mushum? And he'd be like, what, why? Why? And he carved out with his finger an area about the size of this table. And then he went in there, that area, and he pulled out different things. And he laid them all down in front of us and he said, that's for diabetes, that's for a cold, that's for tooth pain, that's for... And he went through a whole list of what all those plants could help cure in terms of ailments. He said, so if you're going and running around the mushkeg, not thinking or seeing about what you're doing, you're going to be harming these important plants that you might need later on. And so it was a pretty interesting experience to grow up with that in my early years in life. And the reason why I bring that up is because, about 200 years ago in my neck of the woods, we had the CIA, the Revolutionary Guard, the warrior sect of the Roman Catholic Church come into our part of the world. They're known as the Jesuits. Anybody heard of the Jesuits? Yeah, these guys are pretty hardcore, okay? Everybody all thinks like Catholic Church, oh yeah, all chill. The Jesuits were like straight up warriors. The Jesuits were sent on missions where they knew they would not come back. Okay? The Jesuits were sent to places to harvest souls for the Vatican, and most of the Jesuits never came back in the day. So these guys were like fundamentalists, like straight up warriors. And anyway, we had a bunch of Jesuits come into our community way back in the day, right? Promising a quick fix solution to the violence that we were facing as a result of the coming together and clashing of almost polar opposite economic, social, political, and spiritual realms of world and cosmological perspectives, colonization, right? And the Jesuits basically told our people up north, hey, look, I know it's real tough right now, these new visitors, it's kind of an intense thing, and you guys are, sinning, you're gonna burn, you're gonna, not go to heaven. So, if you change the way that you communicate with our Creator by embracing Christianity, it's going to solve all your problems. And so we did, and we've seen where that got us. And at the time, the kings and queens of Spain, of Great Britain, of France, and all those other places, they had a deal with the church, and the church made a deal with them. They said, we'll tell everybody that God picked you royal families, okay, and we'll create this whole thing called the Papal Bulls and Manifest Destiny and this notion of Terra Nullius, and then we'll make a deal. The church will get more souls for heaven, aka tithings in your coffers, more land. And the kings will get more citizens and more taxes in your coffers and more land. and we'll all come out in a good way. Now that was at a very high level, right? And you know, and at that time, Christianity in different forms was the religion, okay? That was the manifesto to make this business thing a reality, right? And then of course military and all that other stuff. Now fast forward 200 years to now, and instead of Jesuit priests coming into our communities in black robes, we have corporate CEOs in black suits coming into our communities, promising a quick fix solution to the socioeconomic crisis that our people have been facing for the last 200 years of being dispossessed from our lands, through changing the way that we relate to the sacredness of Mother Earth by embracing the industrialization game. And, you know, I would argue that the new religion of the day is no longer Christianity. It's hyper-individualism, consumer culture, capitalism. Let's put that one up on the board. That's a real important one for tonight. Hopefully I can spell it. Oh. I'm one of those, like, how many of y'all are like severely like feeling insecure about your like ability to handwrite it these days? Like, this is why when I do talks, I'm always like, oh, please give me some butcher paper and a whiteboard, because like I never get a chance to write anymore. And when I write like I'm in grade 2. So anyway, capitalism, real important. It's the new religion of our day, right? And instead of a relationship between, kings and queens and popes and whatnot, we have a relationship between corporate CEOs and corporate boards and MPs and, PMO, Prime Minister's Office. And, and so it's a really interesting kind of frame, I guess, that I'm trying to bring to y'all to consider this evening around the topic of, now I'm going to write this one up here too, but I'm going to write it in blue. There we go. Somebody want to read that?
Neocolonialism.
Neocolonialism. It's a real interesting thing that's going on around the planet right now, and it's manifesting in the form of neocolonialism. All right, and so for me as a young man, and please bear with me here as I go through this personal history, because it'll set the context for our conversation that I hope to have. For me as a young man, I was born in 1977 in the city of Winnipeg. And there's a ton of social workers in here. Let's see all your hands. Yeah? Let's give it up for the social workers. Social workers, historically, you guys get a bum rap sometimes. There's that whole 80s thing for you silver foxes in the room. The whole 80s thing where everybody was trying to be a social worker. It was like this whole thing, but you guys should read about that. But, my mother, when she was 15, she got pregnant with me by my father, who's gone on to create her. And both were Cree from my community. And my father was not there for my life. And my mother, had raised her brothers and sisters, because my grandparents, through the process of Indian residential school policy, had become unable to raise their own kids. Every year, subsequent year of their kids being taken away, they very quickly fell into a life of substance dependency, and and my mother had to step up as the matriarch in our family, and our Cree way we're matriarchal, eh? So like the women really run the show where I come from, and that's a good thing. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But when she got pregnant, she made a hard decision. She decided, at the advice of a social worker, a real good one, to leave Pugatawagan, to leave our reserve, and to go to Winnipeg to attend school and to access some of the programs that existed in Winnipeg at that time for young single unwed mothers. And so my mother moved to Winnipeg. She got on a plane all by herself when she was 15 years old, and you know, didn't really even speak English, barely, you know, and moved to Winnipeg. And a social worker met her at the airport, and she went to the home for unwed mothers in the city, one of the homes. And on July 17th, 1977, she went into labor and walked across the street over to the hospital, and I was born. And you know, the really important thing to understand about that whole story is that, you know, my mom raised me as a child. She went to high school, she finished her high school, she went to university, she got her first bachelor undergraduate degree. She then went to nursing school, became a registered psychiatric nurse, then went back to university, got her her degree in forensic psychology. Now she's finishing a PhD in Cree, and you know, and so it's important to know that throughout my life, the ups and the downs, my greatest hero is my mother, Gail Pelche, who just the other day finished her residential school hearing. And there are many of our Native people that are survivors of residential school policy in this country, this genocidal policy of this country that take the Indian out of the child. And my mother was one of those. She went to residential school for 6 years. And so she just finished reliving that whole nightmare and telling it to the courts. And so she's getting a settlement, a pretty substantial settlement, and we're all really happy for her because, you know, her and everyone else that went through that process, they're so brave because, you know, the kind of suffering they endured during those years in those church-run schools. You know, a lot of kids didn't make it out, let's just say that. So, but yeah, you know, my mother did her best, but even with her best, you know, as a young Native guy, growing up, you know, in the 80s, I was the first kid in my family. I'm the oldest out of 186 grandchildren on my mother's side of the family. I was the firstborn grandchild to my grandmother, my mom's mom. And I was the first one in my family not to go to residential school. So I went to public school. But unlike America, okay, in the United States, at the end of racial apartheid, they used the military, the police, an army of social workers to ease the transition of racial mixing in the public school system. Some of you might have seen on Forrest Gump or some other American media imagery of that era, right? Of when racial segregation was coming to an end. And you know, there's a famous image of two black students being escorted by U.S. Marines into a high school with all kinds of racist folks yelling hateful things at them. Well, that didn't happen in Canada, okay? That didn't happen after 120 years of racial segregation in this country. They just changed the policy in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. The last residential school in this country closed in 1994. What's the status right now?
The riot squad is about
Moved
2
in.
minutes out.
No, I heard they just moved in. Like just got there.
And we're talking a lot of women, a lot of children. They're trying to get the children off the highway run. And I guess for me, like, that's some of my hard part in coming here tonight. Like, these are my boys. And they spent the summer up there, and they want to go back tonight. And I know the only thing keeping them back is mom and their elder.
Here's the latest updates. Already 3 chartered buses full of RCMP and QPP, Quebec Provincial Police. Just